I knew moving into an HOA-controlled neighborhood was going to be a headache, but I didn't expect to be dealing with this level of insanity. The moment I signed the papers for my house, Karen, our self-appointed clipboard-wielding HOA president, had me in her sights. She had that signature haircut, the holier-than-thou attitude, and a seemingly endless supply of passive-aggressive notes shoved into my mailbox. At first, it was the usual nonsense. My trash cans were too visible on pickup day, my grass was half an inch too long, and my porch light was not the correct shade of white. She even sent a warning because my car was parked an inch over my driveway line. An inch. But the moment she found out I had a pool, she cranked up her harassment to a whole new level. Karen had this vendetta against unregulated water features. According to her, pools attracted riffraff, disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood, and her personal favorite excuse, lowered property values. Never mind that half the HOA board members had pools of their own. Somehow mine was the problem. She tried everything. First, she claimed I needed special permits to keep it, even though the city had already approved it. Then she insisted my pool violated HOA noise policies, even though I lived alone and wasn't exactly throwing pool parties. But the worst part? She had the nerve to tell me that my chlorine levels were a health hazard, as if she were some self-proclaimed scientist sniffing out invisible threats in the air. I thought she'd eventually get bored and find someone else to terrorize. I was wrong. One Saturday morning I walked outside to check my pool, and froze. The entire surface was covered in white, foamy bubbles, floating like some kind of nightmarish bubble bath. At first I thought it was some weird chemical reaction, but then I spotted the empty bottles of dish soap sitting right beside my pool deck. It didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. Karen. She must have snuck into my backyard in the middle of the night and dumped the soap in herself. I was livid. I stormed to the HOA office, demanding to see security footage. But surprise, surprise, the cameras mysteriously had a technical malfunction that night. The HOA refused to take action, and Karen? She had the audacity to smirk at me during the next board meeting and say, "Oh dear, such a shame about your pool. Maybe you should just get rid of it?" That was it. If Karen wanted to play dirty, then I was more than happy to return the favor. So I got to work. Instead of fighting her in meetings or wasting time arguing, I drained my entire pool, but not the way she expected. I grabbed some hoses, aimed them at the perfect spot, and let gravity do the rest. Every single gallon of soapy, chlorine-filled water flowed right onto Karen's pristine, perfectly manicured lawn. And within minutes, her yard turned into a bubbling, foamy swamp. At first, it was just a few innocent bubbles rolling across Karen's lawn. Then, like a slow-motion disaster, the foamy mess swelled, creeping up her pristine flower beds, drowning her expensive lawn ornaments, and oozing toward her front porch. Karen had no idea what was happening. Not yet. She was inside, probably sipping her overpriced organic tea, completely oblivious to the soapy flood creeping toward her empire of control. But then, boom, her front door swung open. She stepped outside, took one look at her yard, and screamed. I wish I could have captured her expression. Utter disbelief. Pure rage. A full-blown meltdown. Her slippers sank into the suds as she stumbled down the porch steps, waving her arms like a woman possessed. I could hear her shrieking even from across the street. What is this? Who did this? Oh, Karen. Sweet, predictable Karen. I casually leaned against my fence, pretending to be just as confused as she was. Oh wow, Karen, that's awful. Did someone vandalize your lawn? You should really check those security cameras. The look she shot me could have set fire to my house. But then came the real kicker. The twist she never saw coming. Karen wasn't just some HOA busybody, she was obsessed with winning the annual Best Lawn Award. It was a huge deal to her. She'd won it 5 years in a row, using it as an excuse to boss everyone around about neighborhood standards. And the worst part? The judging committee was set to visit today. I watched it dawn on her in real time. The HOA judges were going to show up any minute, and her lawn was now a bubbly, frothy disaster. She snapped her head toward me, eyes blazing with suspicion. You did this, didn't you? I raised an eyebrow. Me? Karen, I wouldn't dream of breaking HOA rules. That would be against the guidelines, wouldn't it? Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. She knew she couldn't prove it. And even if she tried, she'd have to explain how all that soap got into my pool in the first place. Checkmate. But just as I was about to turn away, satisfied with my victory, something unexpected happened. Karen's sprinkler system kicked on. And that's when the real chaos began. The moment the water hit the suds, a tsunami of foam exploded across her property, spilling onto the sidewalk and pouring into the street like an avalanche. Cars slowed to a stop as the road turned into a slippery mess of bubbles. A jogger trying to pass by ended up skidding sideways into a mailbox. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to roast Karen, the HOA judges arrived. They pulled up to her driveway, stepped out and stared. Mouths open. Eyes wide. Karen, still knee-deep in foam, looked like a madwoman. And before she could even start making excuses, one of the judges pulled out their clipboard, scribbled something down and muttered, "Well, that's disqualifying." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Karen lost it. She was flailing, yelling, blaming me, blaming her sprinklers, blaming the wind, of all things. But nothing could change the fact that her perfectly curated reputation had just gone down in a bubble-filled disaster of her own making. And as she stood there, soaking wet, humiliated in front of the very people she was trying to impress, I knew. This was only the beginning. If there's one thing I should have known by now, it's that Karen never admits defeat. Sure, she was standing in a foam-covered disaster, publicly humiliated in front of the HOA judges, but instead of slinking away in shame like a normal person, she did what Karens do best. She plotted revenge. I could see it in her eyes, calculating, scheming, already spinning a twisted narrative where she was the victim. And before I could even enjoy my victory, she stormed off, her bubble-drenched slippers squelching with every furious step. I had no idea what she was planning. But I should have. Because the next morning I woke up to a notice stapled to my front door. Not taped. Stapled. I yanked it down and read the words stamped in HOA red ink. Urgent violation notice. Due to an unauthorized water drainage incident, you are in violation of Section 14.3 of the HOA Code. A formal review is scheduled. Failure to comply may result in fines and legal action. I stared at the paper. You've got to be kidding me. Karen was actually trying to fine me for draining my own pool. She had twisted the story so fast it made my head spin. According to her, I had recklessly released hazardous chemicals into the neighborhood and endangered the community. Oh, and apparently multiple concerned residents had filed complaints. Right. Multiple residents. As if Karen wasn't the one behind all of them. I crumpled the notice in my fist. Karen wanted war? Fine. She was about to get one. That afternoon, I did what any rational person would do when their HOA goes full dictatorship mode. I started digging. And boy, did I find some dirt. See, Karen loved rules when they benefited her. But when it came to her own property, well, let's just say I found some interesting violations in the HOA records. Turns out Karen had installed an unapproved backyard gazebo, a massive one without permits. Used HOA funds to beautify only her property, funneling thousands into her landscaping while rejecting other requests. Ignored a mandatory tree trimming order that every homeowner had to follow, except her. And the best part? I had proof. Screenshots. Emails. Even a signed document from her approving her own expenses. So when I walked into that formal HOA review meeting, the one where Karen was probably salivating over the thought of fining me, I didn't just walk in empty-handed. I walked in loaded. Karen sat at the head of the table, looking smug as ever, surrounded by her little HOA minions. She was already grinning, ready to lay down her so-called punishment. But then I pulled out a stack of printed documents and slid them across the table. Before we discuss my so-called violation, I said, leaning back in my chair, I think we should take a look at some real HOA violations. Karen's smile vanished. I watched her flip through the pages, her face turning redder with every line she read. The room fell into silence. Then the HOA treasurer cleared his throat. Karen, is this true? Karen stammered. That's irrelevant. We're here to talk about. No, I cut in. We're here to talk about HOA violations. And if we're enforcing the rules, shouldn't we start with the biggest offender? That's when the real bombshell dropped. One of the board members, someone I never expected to turn against Karen, spoke up. We need to conduct an internal audit. Boom. Just like that, the entire meeting flipped against her. Karen's face drained of color as the HOA board suddenly became very interested in her financial records. And as she sat there, trapped, furious, completely exposed, I realized something. I had just set a trap she couldn't escape. The moment the words internal audit left that board member's mouth, I saw something I never thought I'd witness, fear in Karen's eyes. For once, she wasn't barking orders or threatening fines. She was cornered and she knew it. But Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Oh please, she scoffed, forcing a laugh that came out way too high-pitched. This is ridiculous. I have done nothing wrong. The HOA treasurer cleared his throat. Then you shouldn't have a problem providing full financial records for the last 3 years. Boom. The entire room shifted. Karen was sweating now. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out an escape route. Then, just when I thought she was about to fold, she did something so insane, so next-level diabolical, that even I didn't see it coming. Karen turned to me, narrowed her eyes and said, "He hacked into HOA records." Wait, what? I blinked. Excuse me? Karen stood up, slamming her hands on the table. Yes. How else would he have gotten access to those documents? This is a clear case of cybercrime, and I will be calling the authorities. The audacity of this woman. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. I didn't hack anything, I said slowly, pulling out my phone. These are all publicly accessible HOA reports. Anyone with an email and a login can access them. Karen wasn't listening. She was already yanking out her phone, calling the cops. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just trying to escape the audit, she was trying to turn the tables entirely. If she could get the police involved, she could make me the villain. And that's when I knew. I had to beat her at her own game. 15 minutes later, a squad car rolled up to the HOA meeting. 2 officers stepped out, and Karen practically sprinted over to them, waving her arms like she was directing traffic. "Officers. This man," she said, pointing at me, "committed a felony." The officers looked at me. "Sir?" I didn't even flinch. "Actually," I said, pulling out my own set of documents, "I'd like to file a report too." Karen's smug expression froze. The officers raised their eyebrows. "A report for what?" I slid them a printed file, a report of Karen's unauthorized financial transactions, her embezzlement of HOA funds, and every unapproved structure on her property. The officers skimmed the pages. One of them let out a low whistle. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "we're going to need you to come with us for questioning." The color drained from Karen's face. "What? No. He's the criminal. He's the..." One of the officers held up a hand. "Ma'am, if this financial mismanagement is true, you could be facing some serious legal consequences." The entire HOA board went silent. Karen turned to them, waiting for backup. But none came. Even her most loyal minions were looking away, suddenly very interested in their phone screens. She was alone. For the first time in HOA history, Karen had no power left to abuse. The officers led her away, and as she stumbled over her own excuses, her slipper caught on the curb, sending her sprawling face first into the foam-covered grass. It was poetic justice. With Karen gone, things changed fast. The HOA board wasted no time dissolving her ridiculous fines and approving the audit. A few weeks later, they announced a full restructuring of the HOA, and guess what? They actually elected me as the new president. I didn't even campaign. But apparently, people liked the idea of someone who actually followed the rules. And Karen? Well, she didn't go to jail. But she did get slapped with a hefty lawsuit. Oh, and her gazebo? The city ordered it torn down. Last I heard, she moved to another neighborhood. Probably planning her next reign of HOA terror somewhere else. But one thing's for sure, she'll never mess with my pool again. For a few glorious weeks, life was peaceful. The HOA was running smoothly under my watch, the ridiculous fines disappeared, and for the first time in years my neighbors actually enjoyed living here. But deep down, I knew it was too good to last. Something wasn't right. And I found out exactly what it was the day I got an anonymous letter in my mailbox. It was a plain white envelope. No return address. No handwriting. Just a single printed message inside. "You think you've won. But you have no idea what's coming." What the hell? I scanned my street, my stomach tightening. Who sent this? Karen was gone. Banished. Exiled to some other neighborhood to terrorize. Right? I shoved the letter in my pocket and told myself it was just a scare tactic. Maybe one of Karen's old minions was bitter. Maybe someone was still loyal to her. I wasn't worried. Until the next morning. I woke up to the sound of screaming. Not just one person screaming, it was dozens. I threw on a shirt, ran outside, and froze. Every single house on my street was flooded. Not just flooded, completely submerged under foam. Massive, white, bubbling suds oozed down driveways, covering sidewalks, swallowing flower beds. It looked like someone had turned the whole neighborhood into a giant washing machine gone rogue. And the worst part? The foam was coming from my pool. Or at least, what used to be my pool. Because now, instead of blue water, my backyard was a churning, overflowing sea of pure white suds. Karen. She was behind this. Somehow, someway she had gotten the last laugh. Neighbors ran toward me demanding answers. What the hell happened? Did you do this? I was still in shock. I don't know. My pool. And then I saw it. A second letter. Taped to my fence. With shaking hands I ripped it off and read the words. Told you. You have no idea what's coming. And underneath it, a smirking, printed photo of Karen. I should have been furious. I should have panicked. But instead, I smiled. Because Karen made one mistake. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought she could scare me. But she had no clue that this time I was ready for her. And this time, I was going to end her reign for good. I stood there, gripping the letter, the foam still creeping down my street like an avalanche of pure chaos. The HOA members, my neighbors, everyone, was in full-blown panic mode. People were on their phones, calling the city, some even filming the mess for social media. Karen's little soap bomb had turned my neighborhood into a viral sensation. And that's when it hit me. Karen hadn't just wanted revenge. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to prove that no matter what I did, no matter how much power I thought I had now, she was still in control. But she was dead wrong. I turned and ran straight for my house, ignoring the shouting neighbors behind me. I had one goal now, to track Karen down. If she thought she could hide in the shadows, pulling her petty little tricks, she had another thing coming. I yanked open my laptop, opened my security camera feed, and scrubbed through the footage. And there it was. 3:47 a.m. A dark van rolled up to my house. Two figures, both dressed in black, hopped out. One of them, a woman, short, stocky, unmistakable, Karen. The other, a man, taller, broad shoulders, wearing a hood. They moved fast, dumping buckets upon buckets of something foamy into my pool. And then, the man turned. For half a second, his face was caught by the streetlight. And my blood ran cold. Because I knew him. It was Frank. Frank, my so-called friend. Frank, who was on the HOA board with me. Frank, who I had trusted to help me clean up Karen's mess. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. This wasn't just Karen's revenge. This was an inside job. I walked outside, keeping my face calm, pretending I was just another confused homeowner dealing with the disaster. And there he was, Frank, standing with a group of neighbors acting just as shocked as everyone else. Wow, he muttered, shaking his head. This is insane. Who could have done this? Oh, he was good. But not good enough. I forced a laugh, pretending to be just as clueless. Yeah, crazy, huh? I clapped him on the shoulder. Hey, do me a favor, let's talk later. I need someone I can trust to figure this out. I watched his reaction. Just a flicker, a twitch in his jaw, the briefest hesitation in his nod. He knew. He knew that I knew. And that's when I realized, Karen wasn't the final boss. No, Karen was just the distraction. Frank was the real threat. And he was right under my nose the whole time. I walked back to my house, keeping my steps slow and deliberate, but inside my mind was racing. Frank. All this time I had been so focused on Karen, so convinced that she was the mastermind behind everything, but I had been wrong. She was just a pawn in a bigger game. And Frank? He was the one pulling the strings. I locked my front door behind me and exhaled sharply. I needed proof, solid evidence, before I confronted him. I sat down at my laptop again, rewinding the footage. This time I wasn't just looking at what happened. I was looking for what was missing. And then I saw it. Frank hadn't just dumped soap into my pool. He had planted something. I squinted at the screen. It was hard to see with all the foam, but there was a small, dark object near my pool filter. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and stormed outside. The foam had mostly drained away, leaving my yard a mess of slimy, soapy puddles. I waded through it, eyes locked on my pool filter. And there it was. A black, waterproof box, about the size of a deck of cards, wedged just inside. I pulled it out and flipped it over. And that's when I saw the tiny red light. A recording device. Frank wasn't just messing with me. He was gathering dirt on me. My hands clenched around the device as a realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just some petty HOA sabotage. This was a setup. Frank had planted evidence. He wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation. He was framing me. I rushed inside, heart pounding. I needed to see what was on that device. I grabbed my laptop, connected the recorder, and opened the files. Video clips. Audio logs. And then, the most recent recording. I hit play. And what I heard made my stomach drop. A conversation. Between Karen and Frank. Her voice was shaky, panicked. This is getting out of hand, Frank. He's going to find out. And then Frank, his voice low, controlled, dangerous. He won't. Because by the time he does, it'll be too late. And then, we're taking him down, Karen? One way or another. The file ended. And my blood ran ice cold. Frank wasn't just messing with me. He was planning something bigger. And I had just walked straight into his trap. My hands hovered over the keyboard, my pulse thundering in my ears. They were planning something. Something big. And I was the target. I had thought this was about my pool. About petty revenge. About some HOA nonsense. But it wasn't. This was deeper. Frank and Karen weren't just annoying neighbors. They were hiding something. And whatever it was, I was getting too close. I pulled up my security footage again, rewinding through the past few weeks. Something wasn't adding up. If Frank was recording me, why hadn't he done anything yet? And then, it hit me. The only reason you record someone is if you need evidence. Which meant, Frank wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was waiting for me to do something. I had been playing defense this whole time. But if Frank wanted a war, I was done playing nice. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd have to use. It rang twice before a voice answered. Detective Lawson speaking. I took a breath. I think my HOA president is setting me up. I met Detective Lawson at a coffee shop away from the neighborhood. No way I was talking in my house. Not with Frank watching. I slid the recording device across the table. What exactly am I listening to? He asked. I folded my arms. A confession. They're trying to frame me for something. I just don't know what yet. He plugged in his earpiece and listened. His face didn't change. Didn't twitch. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. You're right. This isn't just HOA drama. I leaned forward. So what now? He drummed his fingers on the table. Now, we let them think you don't know. I blinked. Excuse me? They're waiting for you to make a mistake, he said. So we give them one. That night, I left my front door unlocked. I made sure my laptop was visible from the window. And then, I waited. Midnight passed. Then one. Then, movement. A shadow crossed my yard. A figure slipped through the door. Silent. Careful. Frank. He moved to my laptop, plugging something in. A flash drive. And that's when the sirens erupted. Lights flooded my living room. A voice boomed through a megaphone. Freeze. Hands where we can see them. Frank spun, eyes wide, caught like a rat in a trap. Because that's exactly what he was. A rat. And I had just flushed him out. By the time morning rolled around, Frank was in custody. Karen? She was nowhere to be found. The HOA board scrambled to cover their tracks. Turns out, Frank had been embezzling funds from the neighborhood for years. Karen had helped cover for him. And when I started digging too close, they tried to take me down first. The HOA? Dissolved. My pool? Crystal clear. Frank? Looking at a long vacation behind bars. And Karen? Let's just say, I'm still waiting for her to resurface. But something tells me, she will. And when she does, I'll be ready.